Arctic hotel, the challenge was to design a resort in a very remote location on top of a mountain where winter is very cold and long. If you think about this from the perspective of the guests that visit this hotel, why do they go there? They go there to experience the nature, these cold, long winters. The entire business of this hotel relies on the uniqueness of the climate. So naturally, you would want to design this hotel in a way that would maximize the exposure of the guests to the natural environment. But at the same time, guests as people are vulnerable to this harsh climate, so you have to protect them from it as well. So the question really is, how do you create maximum exposure for the guests to the natural environment while also protecting them from it? In Arctic Hotel, we did this by basing the architecture on a concept called the nested thermal envelope, which is a scientific theory in building science. The idea is that you can increase the efficiency of the building envelope by creating a barrier between the envelope and the outside environment. This barrier passively creates more moderate conditions in terms of temperature and humidity around the building envelope, and in turn increases the performance of the envelope in maintaining desired conditions in the living areas inside the building. In Arctic Hotel, we use the concept of the nested thermal envelope to achieve an architecture that would create a different kind of resort experience for the guests. In our design, instead of having two zones, indoors and outdoors, there are three zones with three different levels of exposure and basically three different experiences for the guests. Zone 3 has the highest level of exposure. It is where the guests can feel the cold breeze of air, the icy feel of the snow, the smell of spruce and pine trees. In Zone 2, the guests have full visibility on the natural environment and in a sense walk through it, but are protected from the elements with continuous full-height glass walls everywhere. This zone is unconditioned, so they feel the coldness of the climate, but not the freezing temperatures or the chilly winds because of the fully sealed enclosure around them. So what they experience is a limited exposure. Zone 1 has the lowest level of exposure. In this zone, the guests are fully protected from the coldness of the Arctic climate and can rest in cozy, comfortable, and fully livable areas. These areas are conditioned to appropriate and comfortable room temperatures and are designed to create a higher level of coziness than normal resort suites, just so that they balance the resort experience for the guests and provide additional comfort in response to the harshness of the climate outside. The guests can switch between these areas as they wish and depending on the extent that they would like to experience the nature. Zone 3 is the outdoors, basically all the open areas around the hotel. Zone 1 is the interior spaces, the suites, the dining area, the lobby, and generally all the living areas of the hotel. Zone 2 are the hallways that surround the living areas and act as a buffer zone between the interior spaces and the outdoors. Simply put, the nest of the nested thermal envelope. They create nesting for the interior areas, which in turn increases the thermal performance and in doing so also create a mid-range exposure between the full protection of the interior spaces and the full exposure of the outdoors. This three-zoned experience with the nested thermal envelope is the foundation of the architecture of Arctic Hotel, and everything else is designed based on this, including the floor plan. The way we arrange the floor plan is that every 4 suites are grouped together to form a block. By putting the suites together, we increase the volume to surface area ratio, and this by itself improves the thermal performance of the suites and assists with plumbing, which is always a challenge in cold climates. The blocks are surrounded by a network of glass wall hallways that connect the blocks to each other and serve as both the means of access between the blocks and nesting for each block. The blocks are arranged in a checker pattern, which leaves some space between them to form a series of courtyards all over the hotel. So every block of suites is surrounded by 4 courtyards. Another special and maybe somewhat strange feature of our design for Arctic Hotel is that the suites have no windows. They only have skylights, which are strategically placed to provide plenty of natural light and also a good view on the northern lights. What we wanted to do was to maximize the protective feel of the suites. And an important aspect of that was to eliminate the sight of snow and ice and that freezing pane of glass and generally that feeling of cold and winter that windows bring into a room, so that the guests are fully cut off from the nature when they are inside the suites. So in Arctic Hotel, whenever the guests want to break away from nature and recuperate in a cozy environment, they would go to their suites, and there the nature will have no presence. If they want to experience the nature a bit more, they would step outside onto the hallways, and there they will have full visibility on the environment and also will experience some colder temperatures, but nothing extensive. And if they want to go all the way, they would step outside onto the forest, and there they will get the full experience. So going back to the question of how do you create maximum exposure to nature without being vulnerable to it, the answer is you create all three levels of exposure and let the guests decide how much exposure they would like to have. And that is the essence of the architecture of Arctic Hotel.